welcome back to another episode of the News Roundup. Hurt, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Lots
Good.
happening in the world, so let's get
Man,
to it.
there's a lot. There's so many stories that you and I had to whittle it down to five today. So we got five stories that we're going to hit on, and one of them is completely in flux. So we really don't even have something to refer you to. There's a whole host of stories around the one big beautiful bill, and we'll get to that in just a minute. First of all, let's start with this latest MGMA study that said 2025 provider compensation and productivity data report trends and benchmarks in pay and performance. And what that showed was heard that there was a remarkable mix between historically private practice physicians have had better compensation and better productivity. And we're seeing the shift over to health system employed physicians are having higher compensation and higher productivity. That's shocking, right?
Yeah, I think it's just this continued trend that we see where the private practice, whether the small private practice is going away, and you have physicians either joining large practices or joining hospital-owned physician groups or some other type of physician group. So it's just a continued data point that is driving that shift that we've been seeing for a long time now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's remarkable. It's a great study. So it's in the MGMA Data Dive 2025. So please take a look at that. The second one is around Medicare's go broke date pushed up to 2033. And that was out of MedPage Today on June 18th. You and I did a podcast on what we called the Medicare cliff a while back. And there's always this to be determined date of when Medicare is going to run out of money. Well, it moved back and then now it's moved back up. Why is that, Herb?
Yeah, I mean, every year the Medicare trustees publish a report that basically on the solvency of Medicare and just based upon their current actuarial tables, their current payout, current tax levels, they come up with what this looks like. The last few years, I think it's gone or sooner, then it got pushed out a few years. Now it's come back a few years, but it's all kind of bouncing around. Call it 2033, 2036. It all seems to be bouncing around those periods. So I think unless there's something significant that's done in the next few years, that date will start converging and become more solid, is my thinking.
Well, it makes sense. We're not seeing costs go down and we're not seeing utilization go down, right?
Right, absolutely.
So it makes sense. At some point, you're just going to run out of resources for that. The next one, you're going to have to explain this to me, Hurd. It's around President Trump's one big beautiful bill that made it past the House and it's stuck in the Senate right now. Walk us through where we are with that.
Yeah, so we're in the Senate, and it's kind of hung up with the Senate. And this is a story that just came out over the last couple of days. They, with their rules, they have their parliamentarian review the bill to make sure that the bill fits within the confines of what's called the Byrd Rule, named after a longtime senator. The parliamentarian basically said there's some parts of this bill that don't fit within that, and you've got to fix those parts in order to get this thing passed or have it be passed within the confines of the Senate rules. What's significant for healthcare is the bill does contain cuts to Medicaid, but the parliamentarians ruled that some of those cuts don't fit within the rule that some do, and so there's kind of some back and forth going on exactly what the final thing looks like. And so I think there's some changes to states' provider taxes. The parliamentarians saying those changes you can't do that and still have it fit within this Byrd Rule. But other things like the work requirements that have been proposed, those do fit within it. So that's a lot of Byzantine kind of in the weeds things. But basically, this bill's not done yet. There's a lot to happen. And then President Trump has outlined July 4th as being the deadline to have it all done. So this is a long way of saying there's a lot to come, a lot that needs to happen over the next week, basically.
So there's a lot of really, really scary things that come into it from a healthcare provider perspective. This is where, when I'm talking to CEOs out there, they're saying this is going to massively impact Medicaid funding. Therefore, it's going to have downstream effects on my staffing, my costs, the access to care by people that may or may not be able to access Medicaid anymore. So there's some real fear over the cuts in Medicaid that are coming down from this, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the big fears is just increasing those eligibility requirements if that drives people off Medicaid
Yeah.
rules, then where do those people get care? How is that care paid for? And that's what the hospital CEOs are worried about. And that's the one provision that's made it past this parliamentarian review. And so that's still in there as we speak.
And another thing I didn't mention out of that is just rural health in general. There's a lot of articles that are what's going to be the impact of rural health as a result of this bill passing. And so I think that's TBD.
Yep, certainly will be an impact for sure.
Yeah. The fourth article is really about the ASC world. And there's two articles that I'm going to reference here. The first one, it's in the June 16th Modern Healthcare magazine. And the first one's about the Ascension AmSurge 3.9 bid, where they were able to move forward with that transaction, Ascension buying AmSurge, which is very exciting. And then there's a second one where Welsh Carson has moved forward to buy Constitution Surgery Alliance, another ASC operator. So it's really interesting in that they're two big, obviously the AmSurge is gargantuan, it's huge, but that's a big deal. It just shows the tectonic plates of the ASC world are shifting around. Now you have the Roman-based Catholic Ascension as opposed to Tenet buying USPI and gobbling up a lot of that market share. Now you're seeing a big play by a not-for-profit on the ASC world trying to get scale. I just thought that was really interesting. And then, of course, Welsh Carson being probably the largest private equity healthcare player out there making a big move in the ASC industry as well, which is a big deal. So that's a lot of movement just in the last couple of weeks in the ASC market, right?
Yeah, there's lots happening with ASCs. We've talked about this a lot as inpatient volume moves to outpatient and as more procedures are done in these settings. It's a lower cost of care setting from the payer standpoint, but from hospitals who have inpatient businesses and inpatient entities and towers to fund, they need to go where they can earn a margin. They need to go where the volume is. And so I think you're just seeing this play out with various players in the market. But yeah, lots happening there.
Yeah, lots happening. And then our final story is our buddy Blake Madden over at Hospitalogy. He did a really nice study on physician employment types and trends. And again, it's going back to our very first article. We talked about how compensation and productivity is leaning towards those that are employed by hospitals and health systems. Well, we're seeing the same trend and this is not new. Over the last really 2 decades, we've been watching more and more doctors coming out of training are choosing to move away from independent practice in employed settings. So that's really what Blake's article is about. I'd encourage everybody to go read the Hospitalogy and subscribe to it. It's a very insightful series of analyses on things like this. And I thought this was a really good one. Any thoughts on that, Herb?
Yeah, it kind of takes it back to the first story where the single physician practice, the private practice, you see that really going away. And I think this is a great deep dive in just what that has looked like over the last few years. So Blake, as always, does a great job. I encourage everyone to read it, but it's really interesting just to see this trend that we've now seen for 15, 20 years. It hasn't stopped. It hasn't really slowed down. There's been
Right.
lots of changes in physician practices, whether you have primary care enablement companies or that have come into the market. You have sort of the retailization of a lot of primary care, but you see certainly the employed physicians or the corporatization of medicine. It's a great article that really explores that phenomenon. I encourage everyone to read it.
Yeah, me too. I'm just looking at some of the graphs and we can put links to this in our podcast, but it's interesting to see just the rapid demise of this independent solo practitioner. You're just
Hmm.
not seeing that. Whereas you still see pretty steady state for the multi-specialty independent practices that you could say, well, those are platforms. No, not necessarily. That you can just be regional practices. And then the very steady rise of a hospital-based physician or practitioner employment. Just really, really interesting. So, okay, well, Heard, that's it for today. Lots going on. We could have picked 10 other topics and gone just as deep, but a lot going on. So appreciate you exercising with me on that.
All right. Good stuff as always.
Okay, take care.